In scary movies, less is more. And note, I say scary movies rather than horror because I believe horror is such a wide genre. In some horror movies, more is more. A good old-fashioned B-level gore splatterfest needs to be over the top. That's the way they are. It's all a part of the fun. But for a legitimately scary film, less is better. The viewer's imagination is a creator's greatest weapon for inducing fear. When it comes to the unknown, your mind will always manage to come up with something worse than reality. I classify most of today's supposed scary movies as startling rather than scary. It's all about making you jump rather than actually scared. You all know the way it goes. Oh, we're slowing down the pace, the music's lowering, and BAM! Holy shit, oh, it was just you. Now, I'm not trying to say these moments are totally ineffective. They can be great for keeping an audience on their toes, but they're way too overused these days, and it seems more and more often a movie can be classified as really scary if it just makes you jump a bunch of times. A true scary movie shakes you up, stays with you after you leave the theater, after you turn off your television. In my opinion, in terms of the most successful in its mission to terrify, the single greatest scary movie of all time is Jaws. This movie has made generations, people both young and old, afraid to go into the water. I don't care how brave you are. You can't tell me that after you first saw this movie, you didn't think twice before the next time you went swimming. What's interesting about Jaws is that its greatest curse during production ended up resulting in a much better film. It has been well documented that the mechanical sharks used to make this film were plagued with issues from the get-go, constantly breaking down and rapidly deteriorating from the saltwater exposure as Spielberg refused to film in a tank, a decision the team would really come to regret when one of the sharks sank right to the bottom while producers were on the set. With these issues, you'd think they'd be lucky to wind up with a movie at all. But this forced them to go a very minimalistic route. Way more shots with the shark were planned, but you barely see it in the film. In fact, it doesn't really make a clear on-screen appearance until around the 60-minute mark. Until that point, Jaws is almost like a slasher movie, as we see the shark stalk and devour its victims without ever getting a good look at it. In the long run, this would be much more effective. It goes back to my bit about your imagination. You're left to your own devices as to what this thing is like. All you know is that it's in the water, you're vulnerable, and if it wants to, it will get you. People tend to argue that the opening scene is when this is most effective, but to me, Chrissy's death scene goes on a bit too long. In my opinion, the best part of the film, where this all comes together, is when the two fishermen are out at night trying to catch the shark from the pier to get the reward. They catch him all right, but he pulls the pier the bait was chained to into the water as well as the two fishermen, and one gets pulled pretty far out. We see a chunk of the pier go out to sea, and then slowly start to turn around and head back towards the shore. Oh yes, the shark is coming back for him. Again, you don't know what's attached to it, but you know it's terrifying. And you can't help but tense up as he struggles to get back onto that remaining pier, slipping and sliding off the edge. That is tension. And this theme continues when the crew on board the Orca hit the shark with the bright yellow barrels to track it as they chase it around the ocean. Once more, you don't need to see the shark, just the barrels coming into sight, and you know it's time to worry. Now sure, the special effects in the movie had their issues, and a lot of the shots with the actual shark weren't perfect. But again, they didn't go too crazy. When the shark is on screen, it usually isn't there for long. Quick cuts make it hard to really notice how much of it is off, and the water can obscure the viewer's vision when the shark comes from below. I'd argue the best scene with the actual shark in it is when the guy in the rowboat gets his. we get this nightmarish image of the shark just below the surface and only a few seconds of him coming up for his meal. This is also that first clear shot of the shark that I was referring to. Now, this film and the fear it incurred on audiences was helped by its grounding in reality. Sharks are real, people actually get attacked by sharks, it can happen. So, what about movies that aren't as realistic? While based off a real hotel, I think we can agree that the events of The Shining are a bit more far-fetched. Everyone likes to talk about how things devolve into madness as the movie goes on, but there's never enough focus on the beginning of the film, in my opinion. Before the Torrance family even moves into the hotel. Sure, we set up the hotel as had this checkered, spooky past, but the family does as well. We establish the son, Danny, has had an imaginary friend that he talks to that lives in his mouth, according to him, and he does this creepy voice for him when he talks.
Remember what Mr. Halloran said. It's just like pictures in a book, Danny. It isn't real.
Yeah, disturbing. On top of that, we also established that the father, Jack, has a history of problems with alcohol, even injuring his son at one point. The drinking issue is a great setup in that, as we see Jack's descent into madness, there's always the possibility that this could just have to do with him starting to drink again. So we have plenty of setups as far as things to be worried about before anything actually happens. And it helps put the pieces in place for our characters to distrust each other. Then of course, when stuff does start to go down, there's certain things that everyone remembers. Perhaps most notably, the twins. Throughout the movie, Danny comes into contact with these two twin girls. We get tons of long shots of them just standing there. They don't jump in front of your face shrieking. They're just there. Sure, we get the quick flash of the bloody hallway, but that's not even what people remember. Everyone remembers being frightened simply by their existence. Just them stoically standing there makes you want to look away. And of course, the line.
Come and play with us. Come and play with us, Daddy.
So many memorable lines in this one, in fact. Lots of just disturbing imagery. The lady in the bathtub, which I don't think I can show without getting flagged. Or how about the dog costume guy? Jesus, Stephen King, you have some problems. It's like a nightmare, but Nicholson is the star here. The way he plays a man who's lost it is only bettered by the path to that point. The blank facial expressions, the alcohol-fueled ranting, and of course, when it is finally time for Jack to play.
Darling, light of my life, I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in.
And yeah, after watching it, try turning down a hallway without worrying about seeing this waiting for you at the end. Now, a film like Halloween is a more difficult one to isolate because it blew up into this massive franchise with tons of sequels, a remake that gave Myers this huge backstory, and I guess sort of a reboot coming soon with Jamie Lee Curtis coming back that will dismiss all but the first two films, I believe. It's kind of a mess jumping into this. But I like to look at the first one on its own, sans the events of the others, because as the series went on, we learned more about Myers, his past, his motives, etc. And in my opinion, that all took away from what made him so terrifying. In the first film, all we know is that he's an escaped mental patient who murdered his sister when he was a kid. On its own, awful sure, but not too out there. All we need to build up the mythos of Myers is the character of Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasance. Dr. Loomis has been treating Myers since that time as a child, and as we follow him around during the movie, we don't learn much about Myers except for that Loomis is terrified of him or what he's capable of. Even going as far to tell a nurse at the beginning of the film that he hopes Myers is never released. He also works as the classic trope of a character no one believes, or at least no one takes seriously. As he frantically goes around trying to find Myers, people constantly dismiss him. And as this continues on, the grimmer the picture he paints, making the audience increasingly fearful of what Myers might do.
The blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
As far as Michael Myers' role in the film, much of the most terrifying stuff in this movie isn't the kills. It's how he stalks Laurie Strode, Curtis's character, throughout. Seldom do we see quick cuts again, like the twins in The Shining. Just lots of long holding shots on Myers as he just stands there, of course accompanied by his heavy breathing.
Just the two of us.
We don't need to see him doing anything crazy because Dr. Loomis makes us fear what he's capable of. It just builds and builds until Myers finally starts offing people, which we don't actually see on camera until about halfway through the movie. All the while, we also build Strode as a kind, likable, nerdy sort of chick. She's like that one friend you actually like and don't constantly talk about behind their back. We want to see her make it through this, but with every kill, we know Myers is closing in on her, and it puts you on the edge of your seat, biting your nails through her inevitable encounter with Myers, in which we learn, on top of all of this, Myers is basically unkillable. And like I said, we would end up with all this Michael Myers character building, but in the first film, there was no real motive to his actions. He's just sort of a murder machine, and you know you don't want to be in his path. Yeah, after watching this one, you'll probably find yourself checking out your window for any suspicious people before you go to bed. Or how about a movie that was extremely popular from when I was a kid? The Blair Witch Project. Sure, now we kind of hate it for popularizing the found footage genre, but back then, we had never seen anything like it. At least most of us hadn't. The cheap handheld camera technique gave it a heightened sense of realism. Nothing too crazy happens in the film. Some weird symbols, the infamous hands pressing against the tent. To the film's credit, we never even see the witch or whatever is tormenting our protagonists, and are left once again to our own imagination when the film reaches its abrupt ending. Not to mention the fact that the internet was still in its infancy at the time the film came out, and its marketing campaign made it out like these events actually happened, tricking plenty of audiences. Something that you'll never be able to get away with again.
Josh! Josh? Josh, is that you down there? Josh?
Now, I don't want to be one of those grumpy, get off my lawn geezer types who just say, oh, everything's been downhill since the, quote, good old days. These classics are classics because everyone has praised them for a long time. And while I haven't been wowed with much of Hollywood's latest attempts at scary movies, some quality films still manage to emerge. 10 Cloverfield Lane is about as minimalist as you'll see a major motion picture, with a production budget of only about $5 million. Not as small as some of the other titles I'll mention, but again, this had big names like J.J. Abrams and John Goodman attached to it. Simply, this is a story of the devil you know versus the devil you don't. Our protagonist, Michelle, finds herself in a sort of fallout shelter owned by John Goodman's character after getting in a car crash. He informs her that the country has been attacked. Could be aliens, a foreign power, who knows. But they can't go outside. And I want to say one of the things I really liked about the way this movie plays out, and trying not to get too much into spoilers, is that they do establish that something is wrong out there. Goodman didn't just make it up. And Goodman makes this movie, by the way, similar to Nicholson in The Shining. In the beginning, he seems like he might just be one of those prepper types who rescued Michelle and just doesn't trust her. But as the movie goes on, we see he's clearly not all there.
I see you when you're sleeping.
I
know what you're doing, and I'm always watching. Always watching. I'm always watching.
Santa Claus. There's Santa Claus.
Yeah, Michelle, that's great. Except it was Emmett's turn.
Sorry, I just got a little excited.
Yeah, well, I'm keeping that point.
And the question becomes, is she just better off taking her chances outside the shelter? How is she going to escape? And even if she manages that, what happens next? This conundrum, combined with the highly claustrophobic setting, makes this movie incredibly stressful. And this is only one of many of these micro-budget type movies that Hollywood seems to have a reinvigorated interest in, with similar movies like Split and Get Out also getting big marketing pushes and major releases. Also, both of which I don't trust myself to discuss without spoilers, but they're both pretty interesting as well. When these smaller, lower budget type of films can get some marketing dollars behind them and a wide release so people actually go see them, you tend to see a lot of success. And how could I not mention It Follows? Simply put, some sort of entity stalks and preys on a group of friends. As the movie says, it moves extremely slow, can disguise itself as anyone, and it isn't dumb. It doesn't speak, so when it is coming towards you, it's pretty obvious, but what really gets to you is that it also doesn't stop.
Hello? Hello?
Wherever you go, no matter how far, it's always coming for you. Perhaps the greatest implementation of the you can run but you can't hide concept. Some of the creepiest moments of the movie is when we see it coming from a distance, closing in on our unsuspecting heroes. It kind of has that Michael Myers sort of feel as an unstoppable killing machine. And upon viewing, you'll see the movie is clearly taking inspiration as well as paying homage to movies like Halloween and other classic horror movies from the 70s and 80s. I hesitate to put the witch or the vitch, I guess, on here, because I'm trying to stick to stuff that will have mainstream appeal. This movie is definitely more of a divider. You'll either think it's phenomenal or boring as hell. It certainly has atmosphere, though, and I don't think anyone will deny that. Despair is just all over this movie. Set in 1600s New England, a family living in the woods is tormented by this witch. Crops die, animals die, kids go missing. But the movie is less about the witch and more so the breakdown of the family. There is no light at the end of the tunnel, almost zero levity in this film. And as the story progresses, you'll see a once loving family begin to distrust and turn on each other.
And I will smite Jonas as Abraham would have done his seed.
Stop it!
Fetch the billow, and I will dash his skull!
Do you see? Stop it! Do you see now?
Similar to some of the themes in The Shining, in my opinion, the possibility of family bonds breaking, the people that you loved and trusted the most in the entire world, all of a sudden coming after you, is about as scary as it gets. Lights Out had a great concept, a great scene, I would say. It worked much better as the short film it was based on, which was only a couple minutes long. A creature that can only come for you in the dark, or basically only exists in the dark. If you need another reason to sleep with the lights on, the opening scene in this film will fix you right up. But the movie didn't have much else beyond that. If you haven't seen it, just check out the short film, as it's only 2 minutes and you'll get much more out of it. And in fact, when it comes to really embodying the less is more approach to scary movies in the modern day, I really can't recommend indie short films enough. And there's a ton of them just here on YouTube. To me, that's where you'll see some of the coolest stuff, and how can you go wrong with taking a chance on a short film on the internet? It costs you nothing, and even if you don't like it, you only lost a few minutes anyway. Go give some a shot. So yeah, while more modern, big-budget Hollywood scary movies might aim to bombard you with effects and jump scares, there's still plenty of stuff being made with a more minimalistic approach, aiming to find new ways to torment their audiences. And of course, you'll always have the classics. And with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know what some of your favorite scary movies are in the comments. Do you believe in the less is more approach? As always, I'm John Zakari, and thanks for watching.